So we've got an interesting one here. The boat is being blown into the pontoon berth quite hard, and you've got to go out astern, and Itchy doesn't perform terribly well when she's going astern. So how are you going to do it without hitting another boat or some bit of the Marina?
Problem is that, first of all, the boat really doesn't like going in astern. It's got an egg whisk for a propeller, and propulsion in astern is minimal. The other problem we have is that the wind is blowing the bow. It's blowing from the starboard quarter, so it's blowing the boat into the main walkway and also away from the finger pontoon. So I'm going to need to rig up a system of lines that makes it a quick, easy and slick drop, so that we can go straight into reverse at full power to get out of that berth. And I'm also going to try and make it so that Jo, who's helping me, doesn't need to be at the bow to drop the bow line, so she can be at the stern to drop the stern line, so that I can concentrate totally on steering and controlling the throttle rather than having to drop a line as well.
Right, David, what are we going to do today then?
Well, to get out of here is the first step, which is going to be quite a challenge in itself, because the wind's blowing us from the starboard quarter, so it's blowing us into the main walkway and off the finger pontoon. We're currently berthed with bow line, stern line and both springs, as we would normally be, but what I want to do is to set up a system that allows us to drop much more quickly. So because the wind's from the starboard quarter, I'm going to take off the aft spring first, because that's not doing anything. We can get rid of that. I'm going to take that spring and use it elsewhere and replace the bow line with a shorter one pro tem. Then I'm going to rig up a system from the stern, triangulating a line from the stern cleat on the boat to the cleat on the pontoon, and join it to another line that goes forward. It all sounds a bit complicated, but it has worked before, so I hope it'll work this time. Then we're going to power forward against that, and that will hold the boat in against the pontoon on one line alone. Then just before we drop, you can be in the cockpit, and as we go astern, you can simply flick that stern line off and out we go. So it means that you can be there helping me and the bow can be left unattended. So that's the plan. So the first thing for us to do is to start reorganising these lines.
David's task is not made any easier here, because one rope has been used to serve the functions of both stern spring and starboard bow line. If you have enough ropes on board, it is always better practice to allocate a separate line to each function. The replacement bow line will be made off to the port cleat, in order to leave the starboard cleat free for the new bow spring. Life is a whole lot more easy when each cleat is only being used for one rope and one function. Another problem encountered when one rope is used for more than one purpose is that of its unwieldy length. Long ropes are more difficult to handle, and when leaving a berth are literally an undesirable handful. Tidying the ropes as you go along is always the safest thing to do. A pile of ropes on the foredeck is just waiting for someone to trip over it, and possibly for them to go over the guardrail. Then again, an unattended, unattached rope on the deck can easily fall off the boat and be collected by the boat's propeller. Not a situation you would want when facing a challenging boat manoeuvre. Meanwhile, Jo gets out the red line that will become the new bow spring when David sets up his solution for an easy, controlled departure. When a line has been properly made up, it is not only more easy to find it in the cockpit locker, but also much easier to handle when it's next needed. Now this is where the clever bit comes in. David is going to tie the line to form a continuous loop. Once this has been placed around the stern cleat, the pontoon cleat, and then attached to a new bow spring, the emerging rope triangle that has been created becomes his secret weapon. David is tying a variation on the standard bowline, where by finishing the knot with a looped bight, he ensures a knot that will lock on load, but easily slip when required to do so. Teamwork is always the mark of good sailors, each knowing what is required, without the use of commands.
Okay, take up the slack on the red line.
The perennial problem of having more than one line on a cleat. Sometimes there's no choice. Fortunately, David is able to give himself a little slack, and so ease the problem. Meanwhile, Joe is making sure that an adequate number of fenders are in place, in order to protect the topsides when they're leaving the berth. At this point, it's worth looking at what David has done. The function of the triangulated looped rope is to balance the respective loads on the stern line and bow spring in such a way that when David eases forward with the engine, the boat will close in on the finger pontoon whilst remaining parallel to it, thus removing the need for a separate bow line. From this position, he will be able to power hard astern, as the rope loop slips easily off the pontoon cleat and the rudder can be put over to initiate the turn to port. With all the preparations in place and checked out, leaving the berth should now become a simple, safe, controlled manoeuvre. Now that the weight of the wind on the hull and rigging has been taken by the new lines, David is able to dispense with the original bow spring, whilst Joe puts out those extra fenders as a precaution, should an unexpected gust catch the bows as they are leaving. Now it just remains to check that the new lines are doing the job expected of them.
Wind is built even further. This is an experiment. Just let this off and see whether she lies happily without it. That's the whole idea, that we can get rid of the bow line.
Having set up the new lines, the next task is to establish that they're working. This is a very necessary check, since we're actually looking at quite a complicated relationship of forces. The prudent sailor is never in a hurry. It's so easy to rush things and make mistakes. Not so with David. He understands the value of watching and waiting until the boat and her lines have settled down. And there we are. Now, having made the necessary adjustments with the triangulated lines extended, and therefore the lead in the bowspring moving forward, the boat should lie quietly alongside the pontoon with all the load taken off the bowline. All that's left to do before leaving is to remove that redundant line. So what are the lessons to be learnt from David's demonstration of boat handling skills? Well, first and foremost, that the skipper must make a clear analysis of the conditions and the problems that are likely to be encountered. Then there is the matter of effective communication with the crew. The skipper must make sure that they not only understand what is going to happen, but also what their role and responsibilities in the exercise will be. Then there is much to learn from the way that David approaches the manoeuvre. Having decided exactly how he's going to proceed, he sets up his lines. and then very carefully checks out that his plans are going to work before committing himself to the final action. He takes his time, and by doing so greatly reduces the chances of error. No surprises, no panic, no rush. Just totally competent boat handling. It is important to point out here that Joe and David are going to make this method of approach appear to be very easy. And truth to tell, it is, providing that everything has been thought through and under control. Remember, firstly, that the lines being used here are those which were set up for the departure, and secondly, that David has adjusted his system of ropes to match the geometry of this particular berth. In other words, David's triangulated system is of exactly the right lengths for his enterprise to work in this demonstration. So, there are two issues that need to be addressed. One, that you tailor your lines to the particular dimensions of your own boat, and two, that you are sure that the pontoon berth you intend to enter is long enough for your boat, with the pontoon cleats in the right positions for this technique to be used. These two issues addressed, then this particular rope trick really can deliver success.